This is my first Mirror Cup. The first tournament that we did is the Boulder. For my lineup, I ended up bluffing 2 out of my 6 Pokemon. I did not use Torterra or Gallade at all. Both of them are there to dissuade Medicham as well as Swampert from coming in, but as you can see later in the video, that doesn't really come in considering that Medicham, Skarmory, Swampert, and Bronzong are very popular in the meta. Bronzong was selected because it has good matchups against both Swampert and Medicham's counter, meaning that it can beat both Torterra and Gallade, and it can also beat Medicham and go even with Skarmory while having a fair matchup against Swampert. And in practice, I had a lot of success with Bronzong. However, I did not use him throughout the entire tournament. I mainly stuck with the standard three of Skarmory, Medicham, and Swampert, just due to their great coverage to each other, as well as their dominance over the entire Boulder meta. For moveset, I selected Bronzong with Confusion, Psy Shock, and Flash Cannon. The reason why I selected Psy Shock is due to its spam ability, as well doing neutral damage across most of the meta. And Flash Cannon is there for the big damage, essentially. I didn't use Bulldoze because I didn't really care too much about the mirror match, as well as beating Jirachi. And it doesn't really come up against the other Pokemon that much. For Swampert, I stuck with Mudshot, Hydro Cannon, and Muddy Water. I decided not to use Water Gun just because I like the energy generation from Mudshot. And for Muddy Water, I like being able to bait with it, considering it uses 35 energy compared to Hydro Cannon's 40. And it also allows me to win the mirror match. And if you get lucky with Muddy Water, you're able to have a 30% chance to reduce your opponent's attack by 1 stage. For Skarmory, I had the standard Air Slash, Sky Attack, and Flash Cannon. Medicham, I had Counter, Power Up Punch, and Ice Punch. Even though I didn't use Gallade, I had one prepared. I had Confusion, and then I used Close Combat and Leaf Blade for its charge abilities. And I opted with Confusion over Charm in case I feign a Pokemon with Gallade with an energy advantage and am able to spam Leaf Blade against an opposing Swampert or a close combat against other steel Pokemon such as Skarmory or Bastiodon. In game one, I go against Mew 9132. In the first match, I decide to lead with Medicham, and she leads with Skarmory. So she does have an advantage if I don't use shields. So I decided to stay in the matchup myself because I don't want to put myself in a bad position by switching out first. I go up with the power up punch. Quicker you go to the power up punch, the more damage you do for this particular matchup. She doesn't shield it, which is pretty typical for every matchup against Medicham. You usually let the first power up punch go through. I shield the Sky Attack because I don't want to have my Medicham faint, but she ends up having Brave Bird, which surprised me. Hit her with another power up punch. Knowing that she used Brave Bird, I would know that it would take a lot more energy to get to another charge ability, so I'm able to farm the Skarmory. She brings in her Medicham, and I decided just to stay in this matchup, just to chip it down with power up punches. She shields the third power up punch that I use. Knowing that I can take the first power up punch from Medicham, I decide not to shield. Get to another power up punch. She ends up not shielding the power up punch, which is fine with me. If I had undertapped here, I probably would have gone to the power up punch and threatened the second shield from Mew or feint the Medicham. Unfortunately, I did not do so, so I let the Medicham faint. I swap in the Skarmory to farm Medicham. Now I have an energy advantage going into the next matchup. She brings in her Marsh Stomp, which is an interesting pick. Water Gun is able to chip down Skarmory, but I am able to use my Sky Attack to do a lot of damage if it goes unshielded. She decides not to shield it. I let the Surf go through since I know that it's not enough to take down the Skarmory. And I still have a shield just in case she fires off another one. And I knew I can chip it down without having to use my charged ability, so I take game one. Going into game two, I decide to stick with the same team of three, and I also decide to lead with Medicham. I'm in a similar matchup, so I play out the same as the last one. So to start things off, I just counter it down, get to the power-up punch, use the power-up punch so I can deal additional 1 damage for each counter afterwards. Power punch goes unshielded, which is expected. Get to the second power-up punch. That's also unshielded. So right here, she ends up using her first charged ability, and again, it is Brave Bird. That kind of tells me that she only has Brave Bird on her Skarmory. So hopefully for further tournaments, she would TM that Sky Attack since it's a lower energy charge ability. She brings in her Torterra, and Razor Leaf does a lot of damage, and Ice Punch is enough to threaten the Torterra if she doesn't shield. She ends up using her first shield on the first Ice Punch. I tried to get to another one. Let's see if I'm able to get to it. Nope. So unfortunately, I was not able to get to the Ice Punch, which is fine with me because I can just bring in Skarmory and farm the Torterra. She swaps out to her Medicham, which is fine because I have energy loaded up on Skarmory from the Torterra matchup, so I'm able to fire off the Sky Attack. She ends up shielding it. I decided to swap into Swampert just because I know that she has Torterra, and if I were to have Skarmory faint for any reason, then I would be in a bad position with Swampert versus Torterra. So swapping into Swampert, I know I can take a counter as well as a power-up punch. Use my Hydro Cannon against it. Almost faints the Medicham. She is able to use another power-up punch. I decide to not shield it just because I want to keep Skarmory available. And then she brings back her Torterra, and then I use Skarmory to feint it down, and I take game two and complete round one. Going into game two, I'm against Mohawk. I lead with Medicham again. Medicham has a lot of good matchups in a two-shield scenario, which is why I typically lead him. He's pretty safe. And similar to the Jungle Cup, Swampert is a great Pokemon to swap into because with an energy lead, Swampert is able to run Rampage against basically any Pokemon that's not Torterra, essentially. So, same thing as all the other matchups. I keep Medicham in, try and use the Power Punch as soon as I get it. The first one almost never gets shielded, which is good from a higher level player. He uses his first Sky Attack. I decide to shield it. Trying to get to the next Power Up Punch to threaten the Skarmory. Unfortunately, he was able to get to another Sky Attack, so I either have to shield or let him faint. I decided to shield this one just because I'm so close to fainting the Skarmory and I have a huge energy advantage with my Medicham. So he brings in his Swampert. I immediately swap into my Swampert because I had no shields. Swaps into Jirachi, and I decided to use Hydro Cannon against the Jirachi. These mythical Pokemon like Jirachi, Cerebi, as well as Mew, they're typically very glassy. So if the first Hydro Cannon went through, then I can use Muddy Water, which is a lower energy charge ability, to constantly threaten the Jirachi. I was expecting to see some Doom Desires coming out from the Jirachi, but I did not see anything. So he probably did not have Doom Desire for whatever reason. He brings back his Swampert, and he immediately fires off a charged ability. I'm glad he did so instead of farming the Swampert a little bit, so you'd have somewhat of an energy lead going into the next matchup. So I bring back Medicham since I knew he had some energy saved up on him, and try to hit him with a power-up punch. Was able to chunk him down a little bit, and I was trying to get to the second one, and it looks like I did, which is a good thing. And he may have just been short of his Hydro Cannon, or he may have over tapped and just wasn't able to use it. So that will conclude game one of round two. Going into game two, I decided to switch it up and lead with Swampert. I did get a little tired of having everyone lead Skarmory against me, so I wanted to have a winning matchup for once. So stay in this matchup. Swampert's able to quickly get to his charged abilities, which allows him to win most of these matchups. And I tried to bait him with the Muddy Water, since it costs less energy. I do successfully bait, and another advantage of using Muddy Water over Earthquake is that it costs less energy, and in the mirror match, it helps you win that. And there's also a bonus where you can get an attack debuff on your opponent. And I think I get the debuff a couple times throughout this tournament, but it really didn't swing the match either way. So I do fire the next Hydro Cannon against him, and I was able to get to the second Hydro Cannon before he's able to get to his Sky Attack. And it puts him in a tough position, whether he shields it and uses his Sky Attack, which looks like he does, or he will just let the Skarmory faint. I end up shielding this just because I'm able to farm a bunch of energy off of the Skarmory, and uh, and then I would be able to spam Hydro Cannon in the later matchups. And at this point, I get a little greedy, and I think that Muddy Water would faint the Skarmory, but it was just very unfortunate that I wasn't able to. So I ended up losing the lead advantage. So try to make it up, bring in Skarmory to farm a little bit. We're both down shields, and my Skarmory has a bunch of energy farmed up. He brings in his Quagsire, which would have a fairly decent matchup against Skarmory. But in a no-shielded scenario, Skarmory, I believe he wins. But in a one-shielded scenario, I believe Quagsire would win if it had Acid Spray. We experience a little bit of lag here, but it seems like we're not missing any moves, so we continue playing. He gets to his first charged ability, which is a Stone Edge. It chunks the Skarmory, but it doesn't quite faint him. And since I had the energy advantage, um, I was able to get to another Sky Attack to faint the Quagsire. And I immediately swap out to Medicham, and the reason for that is because I don't want to have whatever Pokemon that he may have in the bag to have an energy advantage going into my Medicham. So he ends up using his Hydrocan here, trying to take down my Medicham as quickly as possible because Counter is able to charge up Power Up Punch really quickly. And I do get to the Power Up Punch, and this should faint him, allowing me to win game two as well as round two. Going into the third round, I'm up against Bobbinator. I decided to lead with Swampert again because I'm kind of tired of seeing all the Skarmory leads against me. He leads with Torterra, which puts me in a really bad position, so I have to immediately swap out. I bring in my Medicham, and Medicham is able to win in the 1 and 0 shield scenario. However, Razor Leaf does do a lot of damage and is able to beat Medicham in the 2 shield scenario. Um, and also, Medicham is able to get to 2 Ice Punches back to back before it faints. And in that scenario, it seemed that Bob Nader thought I was trying to bait him with a power-up punch and ended up getting hit with an ice punch, what allowed me to just delete the Torterra. And he brings in Skarmory, and for this matchup, I'm just trying to fire off as many power-up punches just to chip it down, so that way my remaining Pokemon would have an easier time against his. So he does shield the second power-up punch and feints my Medicham, and he did farm quite the amount of energy, so I decided on which one to bring in. In retrospect, I should have brought in Skarmory, but I decided to bring in Swampert. And since I knew he had a bunch of energy stored up, I have to shield it. So the first one came through, and I knew he had another one shortly after, and I have to shield this as well, which puts me at a shield disadvantage in this match. However, Swampert is able to charge up his Hydro Cannon very quickly due to being 40 energy. And I try to bait the shield by using Muddy Water, and he lets it go through. And I end up using another Muddy Water just because I'm able to feint Skarmory with it. This puts me kind of like in a bad position because I end up using 70 energy for 2 Muddy Waters instead of using just 40 for the Hydro Cannon. But still, Swampert's able to charge up these Hydro Cannons really quickly, so I'm able to use a Hydro Cannon on his Bastiodon immediately. And I try to farm up a little bit more and try and bait the shield, but he is resilient with his shields, and he ends up using it right here after this one. Otherwise, he would lose the match. He ends up shielding here, which is what I expected, and I immediately swapped to Skarmory because I know that Bastiodon had some energy loaded up. And instead of going with the flamethrower, he ends up using Stone Edge, which I thought was interesting. Um, so I end up trying to get to the Flash Cannon just because I know that Sky Attack is resisted. And I am able to get to the Flash Cannon before Bobinator is able to get to his second charged ability. And that takes game 1 of round 3. Going into game 2, I decided to switch it back to my Medicham lead. He ends up going with his Torterra again, which is fine with me. Torterra, even though it does a lot of damage with Razor Leaf, it usually puts you at a shield disadvantage, similar with other Pokemon like this, like Tropius or uh, one of the Charm users. And since I used Ice Punch in the last round as my first charge ability, I decided to switch it with the Power Up Punch to bait the shield, and that successfully went through. And I decided to go with an Ice Punch, which wasn't necessarily needed here. And he decides to let the Torterra go. So at this point, I do have a shield advantage as well as a lead advantage. And I decide to bring in Skarmory here just because he had some energy loaded up. And I'm fine with Sky Attacks going through onto the Skarmory. And he immediately switches to his Bastiodon, and I react by switching into my Swampert. And at this point, I basically won the game since Swampert is able to destroy the Bastiodon as well as the Skarmory. So I know that as long as I keep my Swampert shielded and protected, then I should be able to win this game easily. So I decided to farm a lot of energy off the Bastiodon just so I can overwhelm the Skarmory with a bunch of Hydro Cannons. And he is in Muddy Water range, so I decided to feint the Bastiodon with Muddy Water. As soon as the Skarmory comes in, I use my first Hydro Cannon, and then he ends up shielding the first one, and uses his Sky Attack. I decided to shield it because I know I can get to another Hydro Cannon. So I use the Hydro Cannon here. And then I swap to my Skarmory to absorb any kind of Sky Attack that would be coming at me. And for safe measures, I decided to use Flash Cannon to secure this matchup, allowing me to win game 2 as well as round 3. Going into the final round, I'm against Blue Crab Cards. I lead with Medicham again, and he goes with his Torterra. I just decide to stick this one out, try and get to the Ice Punch as I usually do. And he makes a really good swap into his Skarmory, and Ice Punch will do a little bit of damage. I decided to swap into Swampert just due to the fact that I do not want to have Swampert matching up against with Torterra anytime soon. So I tried to bait with the Muddy Water again. Let's see if it goes through. Trying to chase that last water droplet before it falls off the screen. And it looks like I am able to get the shield off of this. I decided to shield the Sky Attack since I can get to another Hydro Cannon. I used the Hydro Cannon. He uses his shield here, and I think he should have saved his shield and then let the Skarmory faint, bring in Torterra, farm my Swampert, and then he'd be somewhat in a even matchup with the shield. But I decided to stay in this matchup just because I'm pretty sure I can stall the clock long enough to swap the Swampert out. So I successfully do so. I bring in Skarmory, just farm a quick fast attack on it. Trying to see who he brings out. He brings in his Torterra. I made a really bad mistake and decided not to farm it, and I used my Sky Attack early on, which put me in a bad position in this matchup. If I had farmed the Torterra and let any charge move go, and then for his last Pokemon, I would have able to fire off one, if not two, Sky Attacks on it, allowing me to win. But since I ended up fainting it, I'm up against Marshtomp, and this guy is just able to constantly get to his charge ability. And I am able to get a Sky Attack before the Skarmory faints, but this is a recipe for disaster right here. So he farms up a little bit of energy, and I try to swap it as quick as I can, but I'm a little slow. And he is able to get off his uh, Hydro Cannon on the Skarmory. I bring in my Swampert, and his Swampert had an energy advantage, so he's able to get to his charge ability, and he feints my Swampert. But luckily for me, my Medicham had a lot of HP, so I am able to just counter it to allow me to win game 1 of round 4. Going into game 2, I decided to switch it up again and lead with Skarmory this time. He leads with Swampert, so he does have the lead advantage. I decided to farm up a little bit of energy. I probably will not be staying in this matchup. I tried to shield here, but the switch screen was in the way, so I ended up closing the shield screen, but I guess it ended up working out. So I swap into Medicham, and he immediately swaps into his Gallade, and since I had an energy advantage going into this, I am able to get to an Ice Punch. Normally, Power Punch is resisted due to the Psychic subtyping of Gallade, so not many people will shield the first one. and I'm able to get to a second one before the Gallade is able to use his Leaf Blade on me. So this should threaten the Gallade to feigning, so blue crab cards has not many other options other than shield, and he decides to use his Leaf Blade here, and I end up letting it go since I really don't have much use for Medicham in this matchup. And I bring in Skarmory, which will allow me to farm a little bit. And I know Leaf Blade would not do enough damage to threaten the Skarmory, so I let it go through. And if he charged a little bit more against my Medicham, then I would be worried for the close combat that would hit the Skarmory. So I am able to farm a little bit of energy, and now I have an energy advantage going into this, as well as a shield advantage. And I use my Sky Attack. I do experience a little bit of lag, but because it doesn't change too much. So I swap into Swampert, trying to get to a energy advantage if he were to swap. And he may have been able to try to swap here. That's why his Skarmory was standing still, but I am able to get to the Hydro Cannon before he is able to swap. And the Hydro Cannon does come through, and I try to farm as much as I can because I know that he has a Swampert in the back. So I shield the other Sky Attack that comes through, and I try to farm a lot of energy here. So I should have at least two Hydro Cannons. So I fire one off immediately, and he does have a shield, and he ends up using it here. And he has another Swampert here. I was worried that my Swampert would faint, and I would lose all the energy that I ended up farming. However, my Swampert does live with a sliver of health, so I am able to get to the second Hydro Cannon, and since he has no shields, it ends up going through. And then I immediately swap to Skarmory. I guess not. Bring Skarmory in, and for safe measures, I use the Sky Attack, and I will win game 2 of round 4. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video and can apply it to your guys' Boulder Cup if you guys are doing Boulder. If you guys have any feedback or comments, please leave it in the comments section. And thanks again for watching.